Before we begin, let me welcome you here. This channel exists for one reason: to tell the kinds of stories that remind us who we are, where we come from, and what we sometimes forget in the rush of ordinary life. That family is both the burden and the blessing we carry. If you believe in stories that touch the heart and stir the memory, consider subscribing. You won't miss the next one, and you'll help us keep this circle of voices alive. Title of today's story: I sold my house so my daughter could go to college, and she said no. I never imagined I would speak such words, let alone live them. But here I am, saying them as though they were carved on my heart. I sold my entire home so my daughter could go to college, and she told me no. It sounds dramatic, maybe even foolish, when you let the words fall into the silence of a room. But life's most painful truths rarely arrive dressed in moderation. They crash in like waves that don't ask permission. The house I sold wasn't simply a piece of property. It wasn't drywall and shingles, a mortgage and a lawn that needed mowing. No, it was my companion, my memory book, my witness. It was the place where I carried a baby girl, just 3 days old, through the front door, fumbling with keys while her soft cries echoed against the hallway walls. It was where she spoke her first words, leaning against the coffee table, pointing at the family dog with a smile wide enough to light the darkest night. Birthdays were painted on those walls, balloons taped to the doorway, cake frosting smudged on counters that never quite came clean. The house bore scars of our living. Cracks on the kitchen tile told of dropped plates. Scratches on the wooden staircase reminded me of her first bicycle helmet when she insisted on riding indoors because it was raining outside. Even the attic smelled of her childhood drawings, stored in boxes, each paper carrying the hopeful scribble of a child who believed crayons could fix the world. For 30 years, this house held us. When my husband left, it was the house that cradled my tears. When I came home from double shifts, exhausted, it was the house that gave me shelter enough to keep going. The walls didn't answer back, but they listened. And sometimes, in the quiet, that was enough. So you might understand why selling it was not just a financial transaction, it was a kind of amputation. Why did I do it? Because of a dream as American as the 4th of July parades and the flag folded neatly in the top drawer of my dresser. The dream that a child could rise higher than her parents. That with the right education, doors that had been locked to me my whole life would swing open for her. And then came the letter. An envelope, heavy in my hands, sealed with a crest embossed so proudly it seemed to shimmer. Inside, her name, my daughter's name, paired with an acceptance to one of those hallowed institutions where ivy crawls up stone walls, where professors write books that fill libraries, where young men and women walk across manicured lawns believing the world is theirs to take. An Ivy League acceptance. A golden ticket, I cried that day. Not just out of joy, but out of a gnawing fear. Because printed alongside that invitation was the price. Tuition, fees, housing, numbers so large they mocked me, as though daring me to believe I could shoulder them. I had raised her alone since she was 7. My husband's absence had taught me the bitter taste of abandonment, but I told myself it didn't matter. I worked harder, stretched dollars like taffy, counted coins in jars when the checking account ran dry. I missed birthdays at times, holidays often, so that the lights stayed on and the fridge never sat empty. Still, no savings account I owned could come close to the mountain of tuition listed on that paper. And so, in the quiet of my kitchen, after too many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. The kind of decision you don't announce at first because saying it out loud might break you. I decided to sell the house. Yes, the house where she grew up. The house that held her handprints pressed into drying cement in the driveway. The house that smelled of cinnamon every Christmas morning, no matter how poor the gifts beneath the tree. I told myself it was only a building, that memories could travel, that love wasn't tied to wood and paint. I told myself all the things a mother tells herself when sacrifice is the only road left. And I believed it, I had to. The process began quietly. Meetings with real estate agents who spoke in numbers and percentages, never in memories. They saw square footage. Not the corner where she first practiced her spelling words. They saw resale value, not the mark on the wall where we measured her height year after year. Still, I nodded, I signed, I agreed. There were nights I sat alone in the living room, running my hand over the sofa arm, whispering to the walls as though they could forgive me. I'm sorry, you've been good to us, but this is for her future. The day of signing came like a storm you can't outrun. I dressed carefully, though my clothes felt heavier than usual. The notary's office smelled of ink and stale coffee. Papers were stacked, pens laid neatly, the way a soldier lays out weapons before battle. I held the pen, my hand trembling. On one side of the page was my name, on the other, the surrender of everything familiar. I pressed the ink into the line, and with that stroke, 30 years of history transferred into someone else's hands. I walked out into the afternoon light, carrying nothing but a folder of documents and a bank receipt that promised the funds were on their way. And yet, in that moment, I told myself it was worth it. Every tear, every memory, every loss. Worth it because my daughter would walk on a campus where presidents had studied, where doors opened to futures I never dared dream. Worth it because isn't that what mothers do? Trade pieces of themselves for pieces of their children's tomorrow. I did not know, as I walked away from that office, that the sacrifice I had carved out of my own life would meet me with a single, devastating word. Dreams are curious things. They begin quietly, like seeds buried in the soil, invisible to everyone but the one who planted them. Then, with time, with faith, and with sacrifice, they push upward toward the light. My dream for my daughter began the day she was born. I remember the nurse placing her in my arms. She was impossibly small, wrapped tight in a white blanket, her eyes blinking against the hospital lights. I was only 22 then, young enough to believe life could be controlled if I just worked hard enough. My husband held my hand that day, though his grip was loose, already slipping. By the time she turned 7, he was gone. No note, no explanation, just absence, thick as smoke in the house. I learned then that survival doesn't wait for answers. Bills still arrive. Empty cupboards still need filling. Children still need lunch boxes packed with something more than apology. From that point on, I was mother and father, provider and protector. Every morning I packed her into the car, drove her to school, then hurried off to whichever job I was holding at the time. Sometimes it was waitressing, sometimes retail, later office clerking. None of them glamorous, all of them necessary. And yet, no matter how tired, I carried a quiet conviction: she will have more than I did. This is the promise whispered by millions of parents in this country. It is stitched into the fabric of what we call the American dream. That a child with enough education might step out from the shadows of their parents' struggles and stand in the sunlight of opportunity. College was always part of that dream. Not just any college, but the kind with brick paths and libraries tall as cathedrals, where professors quoted Shakespeare in hallways and students argued politics over coffee they couldn't really afford. I never went to college. My world was small, bound by necessity. The closest I came to campus life was walking past the local university and watching students carry books under their arms, their futures ahead of them like open roads. I used to wonder what it felt like to walk those roads. So when my daughter showed promise, straight A's in high school, teachers praising her essays, a counselor whispering words like Ivy League, something fierce rose in me, a determination that she would have every chance I never did. I worked longer hours, picked up weekend shifts, stopped buying new clothes, choosing instead to patch the old. I told myself each sacrifice was a brick in the road that would lead her to those ivy-covered walls. And then the day came. I still remember her running through the front door, her face lit with joy, holding a thick envelope in her hand. "Mom, I got in." Her voice cracked with disbelief, as though she too thought such letters only arrived in someone else's mailbox. We opened it together at the kitchen table. Her name printed in bold. Congratulations. The kind of word that carries the weight of destiny. I hugged her, I cried, I told her how proud I was, and deep down I also heard the quiet click of a clock starting to tick, because acceptance is one thing, affording it is another. The numbers were cruel. Tuition, fees, housing, each digit higher than the last. It was as though someone had put a price tag on her future, one I could never afford. That night, after she had gone to bed, I sat alone with the letter spread out on the table. I traced the crest at the top with my finger. For her, this was a doorway. For me, it was a wall. What could I do? Take out loans I would never live long enough to repay? Let her decline the offer and settle for less, always wondering what might have been? Or cut away the only thing of value I had left, our home? The house was paid off. 30 years of payments made in rain and shine. In months where food was thinner and bills were thicker. It was the one piece of security I possessed. And yet, in that moment, it became my only currency. I thought about the birthdays celebrated there, the Christmas mornings when she woke me before dawn to run to the tree. I thought about the nights when thunder scared her and she crawled into my bed, all of it tied to that house. But I also thought about her future, about the classrooms waiting for her, the professors ready to challenge her, the doors that might open only once in a lifetime. And I knew parents make strange bargains. We give away pieces of ourselves, believing it will buy happiness for our children. We measure success not in what we keep, but in what we surrender. I would surrender the house. When I told her, she didn't understand at first. Mom, you can't, she whispered. But I insisted. I told her dreams were worth more than walls. That I had lived my life inside those rooms, but her life deserved a bigger stage. She cried, and so did I. But I stood firm. I met with the realtor. I listened as they spoke of market value, of square footage, of prime location. To them, it was numbers. To me, it was memories being appraised. At night, I walked through each room, touching the walls, whispering goodbye. I told myself I wasn't losing a home, I was giving her a future. By the time the papers were ready to sign, my resolve was set. I didn't think of it as selling a house. I thought of it as buying her tomorrow. And yet, even as I prepared to let go, there was a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that wondered if dreams should come at such a price. I silenced that voice. Because what mother, faced with a choice between her comfort and her child's future, would choose comfort? Not me, so I sold the house. And I told myself with every fiber of my being that it was the right decision. Dreams don't break all at once, they crack, quietly like glass under pressure. You don't always hear it at first, but one day you look closely and the fracture has spread across the whole pane. I began noticing it after the acceptance letter, when the applause of neighbors and the congratulations of relatives had died down. When the noise faded, and it was just the two of us again, sitting in the kitchen with the letter folded neatly on the counter like a promise waiting to be kept. She seemed quieter, not unhappy exactly, but different. At dinner, she pushed food around her plate more than she ate it. When I asked about her excitement, about dorm life, professors, or the subjects she wanted to study, her answers came short. "It'll be fine, Mom." "Yeah, I guess." I chalked it up to nerves. Who wouldn't be nervous? She had lived her whole life in one house, one town, one high school. Now she was preparing to leave it all behind for a campus crawling with ambition and brilliance. Maybe silence was just her way of managing fear. But then came the late nights. I'd pass by her room and hear her pacing, the floorboards groaning under her steps. Once I opened the door to find her sitting cross-legged on the bed, laptop closed, staring at the wall. "Everything okay?" I asked. She looked up too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking. About school? About everything." I wanted to press, but something in her expression stopped me. It was the same look she wore at 7 years old when she tried to hide a bad grade, afraid of disappointing me. Only now she wasn't hiding paper. She was hiding herself. At work, I bragged to coworkers. I told them about the Ivy League, about how proud I was. Their eyes widened, their voices laced with envy and admiration. "You must be so proud," they said. "She must be thrilled." And I nodded, believing my own story, convincing myself that her silence was just the shadow of nerves, not the truth of doubt. But shadows deepen. One evening, as we washed dishes together, she spoke softly, her words nearly drowned by the sound of running water. "Mom, do you ever wish you'd done something else with your life?" The question startled me. I wiped my hands on a towel, looked at her, searching her face. "Something else?" "Yeah, like not just work to pay bills, something you wanted, something for you." I hesitated. The easy answer, the mother's answer, was that she was what I wanted. That raising her was my purpose, my pride. And in many ways that was true. But I also remembered being 20, sketching dresses in the margins of notebooks, dreaming of fashion school I could never afford. I remembered standing outside college gates, wondering what it felt like to walk inside. Sure, I finally said. I had dreams, but life asked me to choose differently, and I don't regret it. Her shoulders slumped and she turned back to the sink. I don't want you to choose differently for me, Mom. Her words sat between us like a stone, heavy, immovable. That night I lay awake replaying her tone. Was it gratitude or warning? The next day I found brochures stuffed into her backpack, not from her Ivy League school, but from community colleges, art programs, even a volunteer corps that promised travel and service instead of classrooms and debt. She hadn't told me she'd collected them. When I asked, she shrugged, just looking, but her eyes betrayed her. They carried the gleam of a secret longing, something she hadn't found the courage to say aloud. I told myself it was a phase, cold feet. She'd see reason when the time came. After all, how could anyone turn down a chance like hers? Still, doubt crept in, echoing during the quiet hours. Had I mistaken my dream for hers? Had I carved her path in stone before she could choose her own? I brushed the thoughts aside, holding onto the belief that sacrifice must mean something. That giving up the house, the memories, the safety, it had to count for more than hesitation and brochures. But the cracks kept spreading. A week before we signed the final papers, she came home late from school. I sat at the table, bills scattered before me, rehearsing numbers I barely understood. When she walked in, her face was flushed, her eyes bright, the way they used to be when she returned from art class. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Helping with the mural downtown," she said quickly. "It's part of an outreach project. They asked me to sketch the design." Her smile was unguarded, pure, and in that moment I realized I hadn't seen her look this alive when she spoke about college. I tried to celebrate with her. "That's wonderful," I said. "But remember, once you start school, you won't have much time for projects like that." Her smile faltered. She nodded, but her eyes dropped. Later that night, I heard her crying softly into her pillow. And though I wanted to comfort her, I stayed in my room, telling myself it was just nerves again. Denial is a powerful thing. It lets us sleep while the cracks widen, lets us believe the glass is still whole even as it splinters. But deep down, in the marrow of my bones, I sensed the truth. Her dream and mine were not the same. And soon, the sound of that breaking glass would be too loud to ignore. Some days arrive like storms. You see the clouds gather. You smell the rain before it falls. And though every instinct tells you to run for shelter, there is no avoiding what comes next. The day I signed away the house was one of those storms. I woke before dawn. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that makes you wonder if the sun has forgotten to rise. My daughter was still asleep, her door closed, the silence between us thicker than ever. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening, half hoping she would wake, half dreading what she might say if she did. I brewed coffee, though it tasted like ash. I ate toast, though it felt like sand. Every bite reminded me this was the last breakfast I would have inside these walls as their owner. The house seemed to know. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the way the morning light filtered through the curtains, it all felt like a farewell. As if the rooms were saying, "We have kept your secrets. We have held your laughter, and now we must let you go." At 9 o'clock, I met the realtor outside. She wore a navy suit, crisp and professional, her hair pulled tight. To her, this was another Tuesday, another commission. To me, it was 30 years slipping through my fingers. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, though the word ready felt dishonest. How does one prepare to carve away a piece of their life? We drove to the notary's office. The building was a squat brick structure wedged between a laundromat and a bakery, ordinary on the outside. Inside, it smelled faintly of ink and stale coffee, the perfume of bureaucracy. The notary greeted us, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses and a tie dotted with tiny sailboats. He laid out the documents with the precision of a surgeon. Pages stacked neatly, pens aligned, every line waiting for my signature. I sat down at the long table. My hands trembled as I reached for the pen. "Take your time," he said kindly, though I knew he had a schedule to keep. The first page was filled with numbers: sale price, closing costs, escrow. To him, they were figures. To me, they were the sum of birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and lonely nights. Each zero seemed to erase a memory. I signed anyway. The pen scratched against the paper. My name flowed across the page, black ink on white lines, final as a tombstone. page after page, signature after signature. With each stroke, another piece of the house slipped further away. The kitchen where she had learned to bake cookies. The living room where we danced on New Year's Eve, just the two of us, spinning to an old record. The stairway where she once sat crying after her first heartbreak, all gone with the sweep of a pen. When I finished, the notary gathered the papers with a practiced hand. He stamped them, the sound sharp and final like a gavel. Congratulations, he said. You're officially closed. Congratulations, the word cut me. How could there be congratulations in loss? The realtor smiled, already calculating her next move. The funds will be wired within 24 hours. You did the right thing. The right thing, that's what everyone said when sacrifice was demanded. I walked outside. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery next door, sweet and mocking. I stood on the sidewalk clutching a folder of documents, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. The house was no longer mine. I drove back, the streets blurring. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front porch. The paint was chipped, the railing worn, but it was ours, or had been. Inside, my daughter sat at the kitchen table, textbooks open but untouched. She looked up when I entered. Did you do it? She asked. Her voice was flat, but her eyes were searching, desperate for something I couldn't give. Yes, I whispered. She nodded, looked back down at her books. No smile, no relief, just silence. I wanted her to say thank you. I wanted her to leap up, hug me, promise that this meant everything to her, but she didn't. She couldn't, and in that hollow space, I felt the first sting of doubt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the rooms, touching walls as if memorizing them by feel. I ran my hand over the banister, traced the outline of her height mark still penciled on the door frame. Age 6, 310. Age 10, 4'6". Age 15, 5'2". Memories etched into wood, destined to belong to strangers. I ended up in her room. She was asleep, her hair spilling across the pillow, her face softened by dreams. I stood there watching, thinking of every sacrifice that had led to this moment. And I prayed, silently, desperately, that she would see what I had done not as loss, but as love. Because love is what it was. Love in its rawest form. Love that sells a house. Love that signs away security. Love that bets everything on a child's tomorrow. As I left her room, I heard the faintest sound, her whispering in her sleep. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew deep down they weren't about Ivy League campuses or tuition bills. They were about something else entirely. Something I hadn't yet understood. The storm had passed, but the damage was only beginning. When you give something up, the world doesn't clap for you. There are no fireworks, no applause, just silence and the quiet work of starting over. After the signing, I returned to the house one last time, not as its owner, but as a guest in my own life. The papers had already been filed, the funds already transferred. All that remained was the slow, deliberate act of packing 30 years into boxes. I moved through each room carefully, as though walking through a museum of memories. The living room, where her first birthday candle flickered and nearly burned the curtains. The kitchen, where I had spilled flour teaching her to bake cookies. The tiny bathroom upstairs, where she painted streaks of pink nail polish on the counter and swore she'd clean it up later. Every corner held a story, and each story I wrapped in cardboard and tape, stacking them neatly, labeling them with black marker: kitchen, bedroom, memories. I rented a storage unit across town. A steel door, a concrete floor, a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling. My life reduced to a row of boxes in a numbered cell. What about me? Where would I go? The answer came in whispers. I found a room for rent, barely large enough for a bed and a dresser, in the back of a stranger's house. The wallpaper was peeling, and the window overlooked an alley filled with trash bins. It wasn't much, but it was cheap, and every dollar saved meant more for tuition. Sometimes, when I worked late and missed the last bus, I slept in my car. The back seat was narrow, the upholstery cracked, but it was private. I would curl up with a blanket, my breath fogging the glass, telling myself it was only temporary. Mothers can endure anything, I thought, as long as it leads to their child's tomorrow. But the loneliness was sharp. I had given away my home, and with it, the comfort of belonging. In its place was a constant ache, one that hummed through the nights like an unwelcome song. Still, I believed. Every paycheck I deposited into the account marked for tuition. Every bill I paid, every meal I skipped, I told myself it was fuel for her future. I stretched groceries until they groaned beans, rice, bread. I sewed holes in my shoes instead of buying new ones. I told no one. Pride is a strange thing. You can trade your house, your comfort, even your dignity, but pride clings stubbornly. I didn't want coworkers to know I was renting a single room. I didn't want neighbors to know I sometimes slept in the car. I wanted the world to believe I was strong, capable, unbent by sacrifice. But in the dark, alone, I felt the weight. One night, after an especially long shift, I stopped by the old neighborhood. The house was lit from within, laughter spilling out through the windows. A new family had already moved in, a couple with two young children, balloons tied to the porch, music drifting from the backyard. I sat in my car across the street watching. The house looked alive, as though it had never belonged to me at all, as if it had been waiting all along for them. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the tears never came. Instead, there was a hollowness, like someone had scooped me out and left the shell behind. The next morning, I woke in the rented room to the sound of traffic outside the window. I dressed, combed my hair, forced a smile, and told myself once again, this is worth it, she is worth it. When I saw her that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table of our rented space, books spread out before her. She looked up, her eyes shadowed. "How was work?" she asked. "Fine," I said, though my legs ached and my back screamed. She studied me as though searching for cracks in my armor. "You don't have to do all this, Mom." "Yes, I do," I replied softly. "This is what mothers do, we make a way." She looked down at her notes, her lips pressed tight. Later, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my ears. "You don't have to do all this." But wasn't that the point? That I did, that I carried the weight so she wouldn't have to? That I gave everything so she could step into a world that had always been closed to me? Sacrifice is rarely pretty. It doesn't come with ribbons or recognition. It comes with sleepless nights, aching bones, empty wallets, and the stubborn conviction that it will all be worth it someday. And yet, beneath my determination, there was a flicker of unease, a question I refused to face. What if the dream I was paying for wasn't hers? I pushed it down, told myself the doubt was weakness, that I had to believe because without belief, what was the point of everything I'd already lost? So I kept working, kept saving, kept telling myself that giving up a home was nothing compared to giving her a future. I didn't know then that futures can't be bought, they can only be chosen. And hers, as I would soon discover, was not the one I had sold everything to provide. Some words are small, barely more than a breath, and yet they can split a life in two. For me, that word was no. It arrived on a warm afternoon in June, 2 weeks before she was supposed to pack her things and move into the dormitory of her Ivy League university. I had just returned from a double shift, the kind that leaves your body aching and your spirit hollow. I carried takeout containers in my hands, cheap Chinese food, her favorite because even in exhaustion, I wanted to give her something she loved. She was waiting at the table, books scattered, laptop closed, her shoulders hunched like someone carrying an invisible weight. "Dinner," I said lightly, setting the bags down. "Your favorite." She didn't smile, she didn't even look at the food. "Mom," she began, and the tremor in her voice made me pause. "We need to talk." I sat down across from her. "What's wrong?" She lifted her eyes, and in them I saw a storm I had ignored for months. A storm I had convinced myself was just nerves. "I'm not going." The words were soft, but they struck like a hammer. For a moment, I didn't understand. "Not going where?" "To school." Her voice cracked. "I can't do it. I don't want to." The room seemed to tilt. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking, to admit this was some cruel test of patience. But she didn't. "What do you mean you don't want to?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. You worked for this. You earned this." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Mom, you worked for this. You dreamed this, but it's not my dream." The words sliced through me. I felt my breath catch, my body stiffen. "Not your dream?" I repeated. "Do you have any idea what I've given up?" "I sold our house. I sold everything we had so you could go, so you could have a chance I never did." Her hands trembled as she wiped her face. "I know, and that's why this is so hard. I never asked you to sell the house. I never asked you to sacrifice that much. I never wanted you to." I slammed my hand on the table, the takeout containers rattling. What else was I supposed to do? Sit back and watch you throw away your future? Watch you settle for less when you could have more. She flinched, then lifted her chin, her voice breaking but steady. More for you, maybe, not for me. I stared at her, searching for the daughter I thought I knew. The girl who once filled her notebooks with essays that teachers framed on bulletin boards. The girl who brought home medals and certificates, who spoke about wanting to change the world. But the girl in front of me was different, older, more certain, and utterly unwilling to step onto the path I had carved. What do you want then? I demanded. To waste your life on art projects? To work part-time jobs and say you followed your heart? Do you think the world will hand you anything without a degree like this? Her voice rose, fierce through the tears. I want a life that feels like mine, not one I live just to pay back your sacrifices. The silence after her words was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own breath catching in my throat. I leaned back, the weight of exhaustion and betrayal pressing on my chest. So all of it was for nothing. Her eyes softened, guilt and love warring inside them. No, Mom, it wasn't for nothing. You taught me to fight, you taught me to care. You taught me that love means giving everything you have, but now it's my turn to choose what to fight for. And this? She gestured to the acceptance letter pinned to the fridge, its crest glinting under the kitchen light. This isn't it. I wanted to scream, I wanted to shake her, to make her understand that dreams don't come twice, that doors once closed might never open again, but my voice faltered. Instead, I whispered the only thing left in me. You're breaking my heart. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. And I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry, but if I go, I'll be breaking mine. The takeout grew cold on the table. Neither of us touched it. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body aching not from work but from the weight of disappointment. I replayed her words, not my dream, over and over until they carved themselves into my bones. I thought of the house I had sold, the memories boxed in a storage unit, the nights I had slept in my car, the meals I had skipped. I thought of every sacrifice stacked high like bricks, only to collapse under a single word. No, it echoed in the hollow spaces of my heart. And yet, as much as I wanted to hate her for it, I couldn't, because beneath my anger was something far more dangerous. The faint, reluctant whisper that maybe, just maybe, she was right. But I wasn't ready to face that truth. Not yet. So I closed my eyes, clenched my fists, and told myself what I had always told myself. Tomorrow would make more sense. Bad news travels quickly in families. I had hoped to keep our fight private, tucked within the walls of our rented room, but words have wings, and when they fly, they do not return quietly. It was my sister who called first. I heard something, she began cautiously, the way people do when they pretend to be gentle but are really sharpening their knives. Is it true she doesn't want to go? I swallowed hard. She's confused, she'll come around. But my sister sighed, the way only older sisters can. Margaret, you sold your house. Everyone's talking about it. You can't let her just walk away. Everyone's talking about it. That was the moment I knew this would not stay between the two of us. By Sunday, we were sitting around my cousin's living room. My daughter sat slouched on the couch, her arms folded across her chest, while relatives filled every chair, every corner, as though this were some kind of trial. My sister spoke first. Sweetheart, do you understand what your mother has done for you? She gave up everything. A house she worked 30 years to pay off. You can't just throw that away. I didn't ask her to sell it, my daughter shot back. She decided that. I never told her to. The words stung like salt on a wound. I wanted to protest, to remind everyone that I had done it for her, not for me. But before I could speak, my cousin chimed in. She's right, you know. Kids don't always understand the cost of things, but college and Ivy League college, that's not something you pass up. My daughter's voice grew louder. It's not something I want. Why can't anyone hear me? The room erupted. Aunts and uncles spoke over each other, their voices clashing like cymbals. She's too young to know what she wants. She'll regret it forever if she doesn't go. She's selfish. She's brave. Each opinion was another stone hurled into the pit between us. Finally, my mother, her grandmother, cleared her throat. Age had made her voice softer, but it carried the weight of authority. When I was your age, she said to my daughter, I would have given anything for the chance you have. I scrubbed floors so your mother could go to school, though she never went as far as she should have. And now your mother has sacrificed so you can. This is our family's story, each generation giving more than the last. Don't be the one to break the chain. Silence followed. My daughter stared at the floor, her face pale. I should have felt supported, vindicated. Instead, I felt something colder, because my mother's words, though true, also revealed the trap. We were not just asking her to study. We were asking her to carry the weight of generations, to bear not only my dreams, but theirs as well. And maybe it was too much. I don't want to break the chain, my daughter whispered, her voice trembling, but I don't want to be crushed by it either. That was when the tears came, hers first. Then mine, because for the first time I heard not defiance in her voice but desperation. The family shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rising like restless bees. Some offered sympathy, others scorn, but no one had an answer. At last my daughter stood. I can't stay here. She grabbed her bag and walked out the door. I wanted to follow. My legs twitched with the urge, but my body felt rooted, heavy with shame and confusion. She'll come back, my sister said quietly. She just needs time. But time was not the problem. The problem was the chasm between us, widened now by the echo of so many voices. That night she didn't return. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the streetlights flicker out one by one, my body aching with worry. When she finally walked in, the sky already lightening, she looked exhausted but resolute. "Where were you?" I demanded. "Thinking," she replied simply. I wanted to yell, to scold, to demand she never scare me like that again. But instead, I asked softly, "And what did you decide?" She met my gaze, her eyes swollen but steady. "That I can't live the life you've chosen for me. I'm grateful, Mom. I love you, but this isn't my path." The words cut deeper this time because she spoke them without anger. They were calm, final, and in that calmness, I felt something shift inside me. The family's arguments, the sacrifices I had made, the weight of history, all of it pressed on me like a stone. But under that stone was a truth I could no longer deny. My daughter was not an extension of me. She was herself. It was the hardest truth a mother can face. The house was gone. The money was spent. The dream I had built was crumbling. But perhaps, just perhaps, something else could rise in its place. When a house falls silent, it doesn't take long for the silence to grow teeth. After that night, after the family trial, after her calm refusal, we lived as though separated by glass. We saw each other, spoke to each other, even sat at the same table. But there was always that pain between us. Everything we said sounded muffled, distorted, as though the truth could no longer pass through. I went to work. She went to school. We exchanged pleasantries, but the warmth was gone. Meals grew shorter. Evenings ended earlier. We lived together but apart. And in that stillness, my mind became my enemy. I replayed every sacrifice, the house, the nights in the car, the meals I had skipped. I wondered if I had been foolish, if my pride had mistaken control for love. Sometimes I wanted to break the silence, to demand she change her mind, to beg her to see what this cost me. But then I would look at her face, drawn, tired, yet strangely focused, and something stopped me. It was as if she were carrying a secret, one she wasn't ready to share. Weeks passed. The day she was meant to leave for the Ivy League came and went. Boxes remained unopened. Suitcases sat empty. Relatives called less often, their voices tinged with judgment when they did. "She'll regret it," my sister said. "And so will you?" Maybe, but then came the envelope. It was a plain manila envelope, waiting on the kitchen table when I came home from work. My daughter sat nearby, her hands folded tightly, her eyes fixed on me. "What's this?" I asked, setting down my purse. "Open it." I slid the papers out, expecting brochures, perhaps more college pamphlets from schools she might consider instead. But it was something else entirely. The first page bore a title in bold letters, the Margaret Patterson Scholarship Fund. I froze, my breath catching. "What is this?" Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. "It's what I've been working on while you were at work, while everyone thought I was wasting time. I've been meeting with advisors, setting up accounts, filling out applications. I took the money from the sale, Mom, and I turned it into something bigger." I blinked, my eyes racing over the documents. A trust had been established. Applications for nonprofit status had been filed. Local community leaders had even pledged small donations. "This fund," she continued, "is for students like me. Kids with dreams too big for their wallets. Kids who deserve a chance but can't afford it." I didn't want your sacrifice to die in me. I wanted it to multiply. Tears blurred my vision. You did this? She nodded. I couldn't take the money and use it for a dream that wasn't mine. That would have been the real waste, but I also couldn't let your sacrifice mean nothing, so I found another way, a better way. I sank into the chair, clutching the papers as though they were fragile glass. My chest felt tight, my heart unmoored. All those nights I thought you were throwing everything away, my voice cracked. You were building this? Yes. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it touched mine. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I just needed you to see me not just as your dream, but as my own person. This is who I am. Someone who wants to help others. Someone who wants to give back. And now, because of you, I can. The silence that followed was no longer sharp. It was soft, heavy with a new kind of understanding. I thought of the house, the memories boxed away, the sacrifices I had made. For weeks I had believed they had been wasted, poured into the ground like water into sand. But here in my hands was proof that nothing was wasted. My sacrifice had not vanished, it had transformed. The scholarship was small now, only enough to help a few students in its first year. But it carried a name, my name. It carried hope. It carried the essence of everything I had believed in, that dreams should not die for lack of money, that love could build ladders where there were once only walls. I looked at my daughter, her face streaked with tears, her eyes shining with both fear and pride. And for the first time, I saw not just the child I had raised, but the woman she was becoming. You've honored me, I whispered. She squeezed my hand. You gave everything, Mom. I just wanted to give something back. I pulled her into my arms then, holding her tightly, feeling the weight of months of anger and disappointment melt away. She was still my daughter. Still the girl who once traced stars on her bedroom ceiling. Still the child who had believed in magic. Only now she was teaching me a new kind of magic, the kind that comes from letting go. That night, as I read through every page of the scholarship documents, I realized something I should have known all along. Love is not about control. It is not about steering someone into the path we wish for them. It is about giving them the tools to build their own path, even if it leads away from us. The house was gone, but something far greater had been built in its place. And for the first time since signing those papers, I felt at peace. Forgiveness doesn't arrive with trumpets. It doesn't march through the door, arms open, demanding recognition. Forgiveness is quieter than that. It comes in moments, small, fragile, easily missed, like sunlight slipping through a crack in the blinds. After she showed me the scholarship documents, the silence between us changed. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it softened. No longer the silence of anger, but the silence of two people trying to rebuild a bridge from opposite ends. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. For months, I had been the one brewing it, leaving mugs on the counter she often ignored. But that day, she had risen before me. She placed a steaming cup by my elbow as I sat at the kitchen table. Mom, she said simply. No grand speeches, no apologies rehearsed in the mirror, just a word, tender and unsure. I wrapped my hands around the mug. Thank you. It was small, but it was a beginning. In the days that followed, we began to talk again. Not about tuition or Ivy League dorms or the sacrifices that had bled us dry. Instead, we spoke about little things. A mural project she wanted to volunteer for. A recipe she wanted to try, though it came out too salty. A memory of when she was 5, hiding under the Christmas tree to see if she could spot Santa. The conversations were hesitant at first, like testing ice on a frozen pond, but each one held, and gradually the weight between us grew lighter. One evening, as we folded laundry together, she said quietly, I never meant to hurt you, Mom. I looked at her, at the child who had grown too quickly into a woman. And I never meant to hold you so tightly, I admitted. We stood there, the rhythm of folding towels filling the space between our words, and in that rhythm, forgiveness began to take root. But reconciliation is never just between two people. It extends outward to those who have watched, judged, and misunderstood. When relatives called, still whispering their judgments, I no longer defended myself with anger. Instead, I told them the truth. She's not going to the Ivy League, but she's building something just as important, a scholarship fund in my name. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by disbelief, then slowly admiration. Your daughter did that? My sister asked. Yes, I said, pride swelling in my chest. She did. It wasn't the future they had imagined, but it was a future nonetheless. And for the first time, I stopped caring about their approval. Because I had something better, her respect, her honesty, her love. The real turning point came one Saturday afternoon. We decided to visit the old house. Not to claim it, for it belonged to someone else now, but to stand on the sidewalk and remember. We walked slowly down the familiar street, the trees lining the road taller than I remembered, the air tinged with cut grass and children's laughter. The house came into view, its porch painted fresh, the shutters a brighter color. A tricycle leaned against the railing. I froze, my breath catching. She touched my arm gently. "It looks happy," she whispered. "Yes," I said, my throat tightening. "It does." We stood there, side by side, watching as the new family bustled inside, carrying grocery bags, the sound of children giggling through the open window. For a moment, sadness threatened to overwhelm me, but then I saw her face, not sorrowful, but peaceful, and I realized this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the end of that house's chapter in it. "We'll make new memories," she said softly. "Different ones, ours." I nodded, tears streaming freely now, but they felt lighter than before. That evening, back in our rented room, she pulled out the scholarship folder again. She showed me updates, emails from students who had already written asking about eligibility, local sponsors willing to contribute small amounts, plans for a fundraiser she was sketching out. As she spoke, her voice grew animated, her hands moving with passion. And I saw in her the same fire I once thought only an Ivy League could ignite. "Do you see now, Mom?" she asked. "This is my path, and it's because of you, because of what you gave up. I just needed to shape it into something that fit me." I took her hand. "I see, and I'm proud. More proud." I realized then I would have been watching her step onto an ivy-covered campus that never felt like hers, because this was real. This was her. Forgiveness had crept in quietly. Reconciliation had begun with a mug of coffee, a shared memory, a gentle hand on my arm. And now, sitting together with papers spread before us, I felt something even deeper. A new beginning, not the future I had dreamed, but the one she had chosen. Love, I realized, is not measured by how closely our children follow the maps we draw. It is measured by how bravely they draw their own. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is learning to walk beside them, even when the path leads somewhere we never expected. Endings are not really endings. They are doorways, narrow at first, but leading into places we could not see until we stepped through. The day we launched the scholarship, the community hall was filled with folding chairs, plastic tablecloths, and more people than I expected. Teachers, neighbors, local business owners. Even a few students clutching worn notebooks, their eyes wide with hope. I sat in the front row, my hands trembling in my lap. On the stage, my daughter stood behind a lectern, her notes clutched in nervous fingers. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back, but to me she looked like a woman stepping fully into herself. She cleared her throat, her voice unsteady at first but gaining strength with each word. "This scholarship is named after my mother," she began, glancing at me. "Because everything I am, everything I believe in, comes from her sacrifices. She gave up her home so that I, and others like me, could dream without fear of cost. I may not follow the path she once imagined for me, but I carry her lessons in everything I do. And this fund is proof that sacrifice does not vanish. It multiplies." The room erupted in applause. I wiped at my eyes, unashamed of the tears. For the first time, I saw my name not just as a burden of bills and exhaustion, but as a banner of hope for strangers. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Applications poured in, stories of young people who worked 2 jobs while studying, who supported younger siblings who had been accepted to schools but had no way to pay. Each letter was a mirror of my own life, a reminder that struggle is never solitary. We chose 3 students for the first year. 3 lives lifted a little higher, 3 chances made real. When we called their names at the small ceremony, their families cried, and I cried with them. It struck me then, my sacrifice had not been wasted. The house I sold had not disappeared into nothingness. It had been transformed, brick by brick, into a foundation for others, and all of it had begun with one painful word: no. At home, my daughter and I began to plan for the future, not in the rigid terms of tuition payments and Ivy League deadlines, but in the fluid rhythm of possibility. She spoke of expanding the fund, of partnering with local businesses, of teaching workshops to help students navigate college applications. Her eyes glowed when she spoke, her voice carrying the energy of someone living her truth. And I found myself glowing too, not because she had chosen my dream, but because she had finally chosen her own. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our rented room, sipping tea in the cool air, she leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, Mom?" she asked softly. "Selling the house?" I looked out at the fading sunset, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet. I thought of the nights in the car, the meals skipped, the loneliness of that rented room. I thought of the weight of betrayal I once felt when she said no. And then I thought of the students we had helped, their faces lit with gratitude, their voices trembling with relief. "No," I said finally, "because love is never wasted. Even when it hurts, even when it doesn't go the way we planned, it finds a way to matter." She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I hope I can give as much someday." "You already are," I whispered. The following Christmas, we decorated a small tree together. Not the towering one that had once filled the old living room, but a modest pine from a roadside stand. We strung lights, hung mismatched ornaments, laughed when the cat knocked one to the floor. It wasn't the same as before. It was smaller, simpler. But it was ours. And in the quiet glow of that tree, I realized something I had spent years misunderstanding. The true American dream is not Ivy League letters or ivy-covered walls. It is not about climbing higher than the generation before. The true dream is legacy, not of wealth or prestige, but of love that outlives us. My daughter had taken my sacrifice, reshaped it, and turned it outward. She had taught me that the greatest gift we give our children is not the road we pave, but the courage to walk their own. One afternoon, months later, I received a letter from one of the scholarship recipients. Her words still echo in my heart. "Dear Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that because of your fund, I am now studying nursing. One day, I hope to work in a hospital where I can take care of patients who have no one else. Your sacrifice has given me a chance to live my purpose. I will carry your name with me always." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my dresser, right beside the old flag and the photographs of the house we once called home. Not as a reminder of what I had lost, but of what had grown from it. Endings are not really endings. They are beginnings wearing different clothes. I once believed my story ended when I sold the house, when my daughter said no, when the dream I carried crumbled. But standing here now, watching her build something greater than either of us imagined, I see the truth. Sacrifice is never the end. It is always the beginning of something else. And love, the kind that gives everything, the kind that hurts and heals in the same breath, that love is the only legacy worth leaving.